And so I want to talk about, how we can get more women to think about these bigger ideas, because you're absolutely right. Women are thinking a little bit differently in terms of more holistically about their lives, right? I want to have kids one day. I want to be able to, have the family and have a life outside of just work and, not be on that deep hustle culture that is so toxic. So how can we get more women to build in these bigger ideas? And frankly, I want to talk about the B2B space because I know that's where some VC interest is.
Yes.
Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So at FinCapital, we only invest in B2B fintech. I have only worked at B2B fintech companies, Quovo, Plaid, Ramp, and Pinwheel. I've seen a lot of consumer companies and they haven't potentially done as well. And so I'm a big fan of B2B. It's why I joined FinCapital. I recently did an event with Barclays in London. The topic was how to get VC conviction as a female founder. And one of the main things I said was, if you want to get funding, do what the investors want to back. Don't do a consumer lending business in this environment. When I spoke to a lot of the women in the audience after that event, a lot of them were direct-to-consumer fintech. And since have reached out saying I've pivoted my go-to-market strategy, so now I'm B2B. And I think that if we have more women doing that, then we'll have more women that have venture funding.
Can you give us an example of how that, just a tweak in the business model, can anyone in particular you're able to share?
Yeah, so there was a woman that has a startup in the democratization of fixed income. And I recently invested in a company called Open Yield here in the US that is similar in the similar realm. And so when I met her, and she's based in the UK, it's a different market, I thought, okay, this could be a potentially good investment. She was direct to consumer at the time. And I gave her my thoughts on how she can get VC funding. And what she's now done is pivoted the product so that it can be white labeled and put into any of the existing UK fintech apps, whether that's Monzo, Revolut, all of the investing apps over there that are equivalent to Stash, eToro, etc.
I mean, it makes me think Emma, from a founder's perspective, how are you thinking about that in terms of change? Because I think there's something to, you want to stick with your mission and you want to stick with, this thing you've created and the thing that you want to continue to be so passionate, about the problem. But how do you go about maybe but I got to make these tweaks as the environment changes?
Yeah, so I think this whole B2B versus B2C thing is really, really interesting because so similar to Sasha, I always came from a B2B background. And actually, in fact, I came from an enterprise background. So for example, in investment banking, I did structured credit and leverage finance where you are really providing finance to the largest companies and the sales cycle is really long, et cetera. I think this consumer focus actually permeates not just fintech, but all kind of startup areas for women. And they kind of get basically boxed into it. And it is a question, I actually think it's a reflective of an access issue because for enterprise and for a lot of B2B, it's not considered sexy, but that's also because it's not very accessible to people. And so people don't know about it. And it's kind of these gate-kept communities and it's kind of a bit exclusive. And so if you don't know about it, how can you innovate there? And then the really big catch is that the business model is very different. And I think all founders should be thinking about all times the business model and how their company gets to profitability and independence, right? You can't live on this VC funding thing forever. And the big difference with consumer businesses, and there is a disproportionate amount of interest in the early stage from both VCs historically, maybe not now because of all the stuff that's happening in the stock market, but historically there was a lot of interest because people were attracted to consumer businesses have this thing where initially they're what I call fast momentum businesses. You can achieve a lot of initial momentum very quickly. And to me, that is a trade-off because that just kind of basically means that you essentially are able to, there's low barriers to entry in that business. Therefore, the problem down the track is that it may be easy for you to get started, but it is also easy for other people to get started. So you're essentially operating in an extremely competitive environment. And so the quality and the defensibility of your revenues is hard to maintain over time, and you will get lower multiples and lower valuations and less funding as a result. That's why it's less popular with investors. The inverse is true with B2B, and the more B2B and more enterprise you get, the harder it is to get going. The sales cycles are much longer, the ACVs are much higher. And so it was difficult, for example, for us. We're very enterprise. We sell to some of the largest asset managers in the world. Is because you look kind of slow in the beginning. Like you're not really adding that many customers and all of that. But what that translates to is actually from a business model perspective, there are really high barriers to entry in your sector. And as a result, the revenues you do end up generating are extremely sticky. And then once you're in, there is a point at which you will hit inflection, and then the hockey stick's actually sharper than it would be in a consumer business. And you will attract much higher. And it's not as like 1 or 2 times, like multiple different, it is like a 20, 30 times kind of multiple difference for these kind of businesses. So going back to the funding issue, right? If you're a woman and you're disadvantaged in the funding thing and you're operating in a highly competitive sector, the people who are going to win are the people who raise the most money. So you're just kind of like doubling down on this effect, and it's essentially becoming like a self-fulfilling prophecy for success there.